Good evening. Is this on? Yes. Good evening. And thank you all for coming out this evening. Welcome to the Creative Writing International program and Beverly Rogers Carol C. Harder Black Mountain Institute Alumni Reading Series. Thanks to the Rogers Foundation, the College of Liberal Arts, BMI, and all involved in making this series happen. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones and electronic devices. A reminder, too, of what a wonderful, packed literary season this is. Thanks to BMI. Next Thursday, March 3rd, Olivia Clare will read in the Alumni Series right here, followed by an evening with Percival Everett at the New Beverly Theater on Saturday, March 4th, and a conversation with Hakira Diaz and Anna Shu on Sunday, March 5th, also at the Beverly Theater. Please mark your calendars for these upcoming events. About this evening, after the reading, there will be time for questions and answers, and books will be available for purchase and author signing through the Writer's Block. Thank you to the Writer's Block's Drew Cohen at the book table. Thanks for always being here and for being so nice to everybody. Now let's please take a moment to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the ancestral lands of the Nuwu or Nuwuvi or Moapa Band of the Southern Paiute people. Everywhere we walk in this part of the world is in their tribal and communal space, never ceded by any treaty or agreement. Let's honor this truth and be mindful of Paiute sacred belief that everything is related to everything else. Everything we do affects everything else. We encourage everyone to engage in shared stewardship of the land, in active learning about the historical realities of colonialism and of the indigenous peoples who continue to work and live here since time immemorial. Thank you. Whenever I welcome back an alumni of our creative writing program, I think of the seeds that may have taken root here that we can see and read in full bloom and celebrate in the published book. Chen Ho came to us carrying at least three worlds: the Taiwan, where she was born, home of her grandparents and extended family, most impactfully of her father; the Los Angeles, where she moved at the age of 8, grew up mainly with her mother, and went to school; the New York, where she had worked, struggled, and, as Louise Erdrich summed up the Big Apple for so many developing writers, lived, quote, so despairingly broke, yet so in awe of the place itself, in Jean's case, especially of its style and fashion, where she became an expert at treasure hunting designer labels in the secondhand stores. Jean was writing about all three worlds, stories that experimented with and explored varying events, choices, and possibilities for her characters, stories that also tried to find their ways through multiple levels of hybridity, of language, the Mandarin that was her first language, and English she claims to have learned, quote, by osmosis, though that's hard to believe by the sophistication of her writing. Also, the hybridity of complex issues of race, gender, and intersectionality before intersectionality was a word much in use, while with intense focus on the cultural inheritance, conflicts, and identity issues of an Asian American community from several national and first language origins. Jean's early stories kept pushing at discovering connections among her worlds, also voices in common in that community that she tried on and then discarded and then revised, draft after draft, frustrated sometimes, not at all confident, as she searched for the resonant emotive core that could pull them all together. Jean was also known for her friendships here. She was one of what I will always think of as the most dynamic and truly awesome trio of empowered women who ever walked the UNLV campus. All three shoulder to shoulder as they strode across the quad, sharing their special code of talk, laughter, and co-conspiracies. Chen Ho, Brittany Bronson, and Regina Ernst. Crowds would part. Professors and administrators stepped aside, I swear. No one could be immune from their combined powers. Everyone fell in love with them. In workshop, they said as much in glances to each other across the table as anyone else could with carefully worded critiques. Jean was one of the best friends anyone could have in our program. After she earned her MFA and set off to make her career, we all felt a void that lasted a long, long time. We cheered her PhD studies at USC. She just defended 2 weeks ago. So this is Dr. Ho. We jumped and said, way to go, at her online essay skewering the elitist, discriminatory horrors carried on by the Breadloaf Writers Conference that forced changes long overdue. We passed around her early publications in electric literature, the Georgia Review, Guernica, and elsewhere, and just last year, her powerful personal essay on love and what might have been, published in the New York Times Magazine. Jean was already a star when a student here, so eventual literary stardom felt like a given, the way she worked. The Kundiman Fellowship to cultivate Asian American writing, the fellowship at the Huntington Library, residencies at MacDowell and Tin House, her first visiting faculty job as the Mary Routt Endowed Chair at Scripps College, where she's now teaching. And most importantly, her 2-book contract with the Viking Press, her collection of stories, and her new novel, On the Horizon. Way to go. Jean's first book, Fiona and Jane, has so far earned more than 40 reviews, features, and interviews, a must-read book for the New York Times and elsewhere. Last March, my friend Grace Young showed me how news of the book was being passed around on every Facebook and Twitter feed in her social community in both Chinese and English. Almost all reviews offer high acclaim, indicating Chen Ho's arrival into a community of authors including Celeste Ng, Yiz Chin, Lisa Ko, and others. Only a few critics on the margin engage in that tired critique of the collection of linked stories as not quite being a novel, the kind of snake biting its tail review Jennifer Egan received for her Pulitzer Prize winning A Visit to the Goon Squad. The reviews that get it right focus on friendship, on 2 Taiwanese American girls growing up, both in different ways, both with strong mothers and absent fathers, stories that alternate in their deep dive searches for place, identity, and sexual orientation that also extends out through a first-generation Asian American community of many origins. This is the book Jean was always writing, the book in which all 3 worlds she carried with her came together, grown and full, through her artistic talent, her talent for friendship, and her caring. Please help me give a happy welcome to celebrated author Chen Ho.
Wow. I'm crying, literally. Sorry. Thank you, Doug, for that wonderful introduction. I'm very emotional. I knew this would be a very emotional gathering because I feel so surreal being here. I graduated from the MFA in 2014, and now it's almost been a decade, and I'm back here with my book. And I saw Miley earlier, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm speechless. I'm so grateful for everyone for being here. There's like several of my friends who were in the MFA who are still in Vegas here. I'm so happy to reunite with you. And it was just actually a vast coincidence that last weekend I was in Houston visiting Brittany, who's now doing her PhD at UH, and Regina, who now lives in DC. She came in, and 2 of our other very good friends who were poets in the MFA and fell in love during their time here. They live in Florida. They also came to Houston, and my cousin Cynthia, she's out here somewhere. She also came with us. So it's been like back-to-back weekends of living a really lovely, nostalgic revisitation. So I'm just so thrilled. So thank you all. Okay, so I'm gonna As Doug said, this book is about friendship. It's about two Taiwanese American women, and it's about the ebbs and flows of their friendship over 20 years. They became best friends in the second grade, and throughout high school, they fall apart in their 20s. And then Fiona is the one who's always been the leader in the friendship. She's really ambitious and is the friend who always has a plan. She moves to New York, and Jane is the friend who is a little bit more dreamy. She's sort of floating around in her 20s. And in their 30s, they come back together and have to learn to be friends again. So I'm going to read a story from the latter part of the book after Fiona has moved back from New York. And despite the fact that she's so smart and capable and has so many plans for herself, she really failed romantically, career-wise. She's really broken down in her spirit. But so she moves back to LA, and this is a story in which Fiona's rebuilding her life, and Jane is really observing her friend coming into her own again. So the story is called Clairvoyance. Fiona hadn't been invited to Jasper's wedding, obviously. Later on, she saw pictures online, posted by old college friends they both knew. Jasper and his bride posing on the beach in Honolulu. He had on white linen slacks and a cream-colored guayabera, a lei of dark green leaves draped over his shoulders that hung in two thick vines down the front. The wife, pretty in a bookish way, with a bright smile and dark blonde corkscrews. She wore a crown of gardenias and baby's breath on her head. The top and bottom halves of her body looked as if they belonged to two different women. She had narrow shoulders and arms like matchsticks, but below the waist, her hips flared voluptuously. Fiona studied the pictures, trying to decide if she felt anything about them. Jasper, her college sweetheart, her first love. She reached for the phone to call up Jane. Well, you're winning, Jane said. You're on your second marriage. He's only on the first. A laugh in her voice. What an amateur. He looks constipated, Fiona said. He never knew how to smile like a real person. It takes practice to look like a real person, Jane agreed. I never thought he would get married, said Fiona. I always had a feeling he would end up alone and weird. What's her name? Jane asked. Who is she? Kenji says she's rich. Rich how? What did he say? Maybe now he can finally finish writing his novel, Fiona said. It had been more than a decade since Fiona moved to New York straight from undergrad. Back then, she and Jasper were boundless, dancing along the city's golden rhythm. Nothing and nobody could stop them. Fee, you still there? Jane said. Fiona realized she'd been silent a long while. I'm still here, she said. Guess what? She hesitated a moment. I'm, well, the thing is, I'm pregnant. What? I went to the doctor's yesterday. It's only 11 weeks, but you're having a baby? Jane said. I didn't even know you were trying to. Wait a minute, Jane said, her voice suddenly serious. You want this, right? Yes, Fiona said quickly. I do. We do. Oh my God, I can't believe it, Jane said. She was quiet for a moment. A baby, she said. Congratulations, she added. Did I say that already? Fiona felt warmth spread through her chest. She recognized then that she felt relieved. Now that she told Jane, the baby felt real. Are you having a boy or a girl? Too early to tell, Fiona said. Bobby wants a girl. Of course he does, said Jane. By the way, I can't believe you told him before you told me. I mean, he's only the dad, Fiona laughed. So what? The laughing was back in her voice. Male privilege strikes again. You hate babies, Fiona said. I won't hate yours. You said babies shouldn't be allowed in public last week. Your baby won't be an asshole like the one sitting next to us at brunch. What if she is an asshole, Fiona said. Or he. Dude, see, Jane said, you're totally winning over Jasper. It's sealed now with this baby. Fiona recalled the time she and Jasper walked over the bridge into Brooklyn to cheer for Kenji and the Idiatarod. Stolen pathmark carts festooned in tinfoil, silk flowers, and painted cardboard. Grown men in stretched lycra bodysuits muffing down Bedford Avenue. Kenji was on a team with some teachers from his school. Dirty, hardened snow piled up along the sidewalk, her breath visible in the air. At the finish line, she stood with her hands tucked inside the pocket of Jasper's corduroy coat, her ears frozen, nose dripping, watching for Kenji to bend around the corner. When he finally appeared, shopping cart wheels scraping, she'd waved wildly and shouted his name, but couldn't catch his eye. Kenji rushed for the long red ribbon that hung across the middle of the wet black street. She looked up at Jasper then. A smile creased his face. In his eyes, she'd glimpsed her whole future. That was all before Kenji got sick. He'd recovered anyway. It took time, but he got his mouth back, his throat, his voice. His hair grew in after the chemo rounds, his eyebrows and eyelashes. His skin lost that waxy plastic doll sheen. She'd been afraid he might die. If he had, Fiona thought, maybe she and Jasper might have worked things out sewn together by grief. Then she felt terrible for imagining that possibility. In her New York years, Fiona had lost touch with Jane. She wondered now if it had been on purpose, the way she let the time between returning Jane's phone calls, her emails, stretch out languorously. In truth, didn't she believe her life, the choices she made possible for herself, superior to Jane's? The odd jobs Jane worked and often lost carelessly after they graduated high school. Of course, Jane didn't really have to work, did she? Her mother always floated her money anyway. Then her father died the way he did. Fiona had left California that year. Did I ever tell you, Fiona said quietly into the phone, about the time Jasper and me, we accidentally. She couldn't bring herself to say the words. Was it bad luck to bring it up now? What happened? Jane said. Nothing, Fiona said. She touched a hand to her belly. If she hadn't done it, that child would be, how old? Almost a teenager. Hey, you okay? Jane said. I was joking about Jasper, about winning. I had an abortion years ago, Fiona said. Obviously, I had to. I mean, we talked about it. What if Jasper wanted to keep it more than me? Jane was quiet. It happened right after we moved to New York. We didn't even have a sofa yet. Fiona shook her head. It's not like I regret it or anything. She thought of the apartment on Mulberry Street and recalled the scent of almond cookies from the Italian bakery on the ground floor. It was the right decision. Of course it was, Jane replied. But it just makes me think, Fiona said after a moment. And seeing his dumb wedding photos, think what? I don't know, said Fiona, that some part of me still. I remember thinking, we'll get to do it for real one day, you know? Me and him. Part of you still, what? Loves him. It doesn't mean anything, Fiona said. I'm happy. She laughed, though she didn't know why. I'm happy. I mean it. Everything's great. What's going on? Jane asked. Seriously, is Bobby. Nothing, Fiona said. I swear, I'm fine. She laughed again, and this time it felt like she'd pressed a valve, pressure alleviated. Janie, she said, don't you ever think about what other lives you could be living? Hell no, said Jane. What's the point of that? Once it's done, I'm over it. No regrets. You weren't always like that. After a moment, Fiona said, I was thinking about my mom this week. Jane made a noise, half grunt and half moan, a comforting sound. I know, she said. Then she was quiet. I missed her too, she said finally. It had been 2 years since Auntie Wendy passed. I think she would have liked Bobby, Jane said. You think so? Fiona wanted to believe her. Tell him I said congrats too, Fiona said, and Fiona promised she would. Can I tell you something? Fiona said suddenly. Jane waited for her to go on. I've never told you about my dad. She paused a moment. My biological father back in Taiwan. She took a breath. I can finally talk about it now that Mom's. Jane listened to her best friend tell the story of how her mother became a mother at 16. Her father, Fiona said, was an older boy, a college student, studying under Fiona's grandfather. In all the years they'd been friends, Jane had never asked Fiona about her father. It wasn't that she hadn't been curious. Some things, even between friends like they were, remained unspoken, passed over in silence. Fiona talked on. Jane could hardly imagine it. Auntie Wendy, a scandalized teenage mother on her own, and yet she could see it all so clearly. Fiona as a little girl, her mother's treasure, protected at all cost. They were happy, Jane knew without Fiona saying so, mother and daughter close in a way that had always felt foreign to Jane. Growing up, Jane preferred playing at Fiona's house, where there were no restrictions on what they could watch on TV, how long the set stayed on, or whether they finished their homework first. Where their afternoon snacks were pepperoni hot pockets heated up in stiff paper sleeves, fried shrimp and teriyaki hot wings from the casino buffet in styrofoam takeout containers. Where all sorts of kids in the apartment complex dropped by to ask if Fiona wanted to go ride bikes if they heard the ice cream truck go past yet today. And when they were teenagers, Fiona's mother was more like a friend than a parent. She gossiped with the girls, told them outrageous stories about the casino regulars. Auntie Wendy never scolded, and like Jane's mother, who was always breathing down her daughter's neck, finding fault. "Do you ever think about finding him? Your father?" Jane asked. "No," said Fiona without hesitation. "And anyway, now there's no point." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't ever want my baby to feel that way," Fiona said, and wanted. "Fiona, I made my mom's life so hard, and then I think about what I did. You were wanted," Jane said. "What you and Jasper chose to do, it was the right thing." A pause. Then, "And this baby, she's wanted too." "She? I have a feeling," said Jane. They hung up the phone. In her apartment, Jane settled back into the sofa. She folded her hands in her lap. It was Saturday, and she had the rest of the afternoon ahead. Nothing planned other than a couple of errands, the car due for an oil change, and another thing she couldn't remember now. What was it? Something she put off all week. Still, she sat there, considering what Fiona had just told her. A baby coming. Fiona and Bobby's baby. She was going to be an aunt. Jane sighed. Everything was going to change. She stood and plodded to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator door, and peered inside. Fiona was going away, she thought. There were 3 cans of Diet Coke left, a wedge of Parmigiano Reggiano in a sandwich bag. Jane felt afraid. She thought of Bobby and despised him a little. She thought of the annoying habits he had that Fiona complained about, and then the ones she noticed herself but kept quiet on. Analyzing Bobby was commenting on the weather. He existed regardless, her best friend's husband, and Jane accepted this as fact. She shut the refrigerator door. At the grocery store later, after the oil change, Jane overheard a man on the phone asking if there was enough butter or if he should pick up another package. "Do we get the salted or the unsalted?" he said. Jane thought it was a lovely question. She reached for the red carton of salted butter and placed it in her basket, even though it wasn't on her list. She was happy for her best friend. She hadn't known that Fiona wanted a baby. After her mother passed, Fiona suddenly became serious about meeting a man and marrying again. For a while, after divorcing Aaron, she shut off that part of herself, it seemed. All their lives, Fiona had attracted attention without trying. It wasn't only that she was beautiful, smart, stylish. Fiona understood now that it wasn't only that she was beautiful, smart, stylish. Jane understood now that there was something guarded about Fiona, as if she were always looking behind her, watching her back. Even while her eyes were fixed on you, Fiona was casing the room for exits, some alert quality about her that was unsettling and sexy. Jane had never felt jealous of Fiona. She didn't compete with her. She'd only ever wanted her to stay. When they were younger, she never wanted Fiona to go home at the end of the night. She would sit in Shamu, talking on forever. The two of them shared everything, and a compliment to one was accepted equally by the other, though most often, Jane knew, it was Fiona to whom the unsolicited kind words were directed, and Jane who stood in the refracted light. Groceries stowed in the trunk, she drove back to her apartment listlessly. Everything seemed back on track in Fiona's life. Last year, she transferred her credits to UCLA and completed the law degree she'd abandoned in New York. She passed the California bar on the first try. She met Bobby on Tinder. Now, a baby. Jane was happy for her, yeah. Yes, she really was. But what was this other feeling buried within it? Fiona was leaving again. She was always leaving. And this time, Jane feared there would be no coming back. A baby changed everything more than a man ever could. She thought they'd had more time. There were still so many silences passed over. Fiona was going away now, some other planet where mothers lived, while Jane remained here in place. She moved through the apartment from room to room, turning on the lamps, as though searching for something. Nothing was missing. She felt as lonely as she'd ever been. Thank you.